Wow. Hello, everybody. Where do I see if people are joining us yet? Here we go. Oh, we got 9 people. Tandy's all right. People are logging in. Welcome to Language Adventure Pro's webinar, The Wines of Mexico, a practical guide with Natalia López Mota. We're going to give you time for everybody to get here and settle in. My name is Rebecca Eichler, and along with Ginger Bandoni, we run Language Adventure Pros, which offers curated language and cultural experiences for professionals, individuals, and families, as well as any other adventurous people. We are super excited to have Natalia here with us today. She's actually one of our Spanish teachers, because we also offer Spanish courses. So if you like what she has to teach you about wine, she can teach you a lot about in Spanish as well. We actually thought about doing a kind of a wine Spanish conversation, right, Natalia? Weren't we talking about that at some point?
Yeah.
I think that would be a really neat thing. Everybody, as you're logging in, we would love to hear where you're joining us from. It's been really fun to see where our attendees are, because all 3 of us, Ginger, Natalia, and I are here in beautiful San Miguel, where the rainy season has started and where we've all been in lockdown since middle of March. And I think we're all drinking a lot of wine. So we think that this webinar is quite timely. Hi, Sherry from San Miguel, and we have Robert Glaze in Chicago. I hope you get to come back here sometime soon. So should I, oh yeah, we were going to talk about upcoming webinars we have after this. Well, I'll introduce Natalia first. Where do I have her thing? Natalia López Mota is a Mexican winemaker, passionate about nature, science, creativity, traditions, and human perception. In addition to being an amazing Spanish teacher, Natalia is a food chemist with a specialty in sensory analysis from UNAM, with an International Master of Science degree in enology, viticulture, and terroir from France, Italy, and Spain. She has 8 years of experience working in the wine industry in Mexico. She works as a winemaker consultant at different wineries in central Mexico. She also consults chefs and restaurants on the subject of wine pairings and works as a professor training sommeliers. In 2017, along with her partner, they founded Cava Garambullo here in San Miguel de Allende. They specialize in natural fermented wines. One of Natalia's biggest skills is translating wine into an accessible subject to people. So without further ado, oh, wait, no, I do have a further ado. If you haven't had a chance to donate, we will put the link in the chat window, and you can send in your suggested donation. And your registration for today's webinar covers next week's webinar as well, which will be next Thursday, June 18th, same time, 5 to 6:30. We also, I'm going to put a quick plug in for our other webinars that we have. In July, we have Mexican muralist Alberto Lenz with a 3-part series called Revolution on the Walls, talking about Mexican muralism. We have a couple other things in the works. We don't have dates yet, but we will be visiting the Mojigangas here in San Miguel, and we're going to have a repeat visit to the Mask Museum, also in San Miguel. So hope that you can join us for all those, but from now we will, here's Natalia. Thank you so much for joining us, Natalia, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Natalia.
Thank you all for being here, for the interest that you have in the subject. It's a pleasure for me to be sharing about one of my biggest passions, my work, my culture, and so many things. So we will have a time for questions and answers at the end of this session and at the end of the next session. But you have opened the chat also available for writing your questions. If they are related exactly to the subject where in the part where I'm speaking, then I might include the answer inside of the presentation. And if I see that it will cut a little bit the flow, then I might take the questions and then we can take those ones for the last part of the seminar. So let's start with speaking a little bit about wines of Mexico. So I guess that when somebody hear about Mexico, one of the easiest brainstormed ideas that you have like to associate Mexico with, it's tequila, mezcal, our rich gastronomy, our rich pre-Hispanic culture, our rich mixed culture as well, and a live culture in music and also in gastronomy with Spanish and the pre-Hispanic culture and a lot of things that Mexico has to offer. So wine, it's something that in general, when I travel and when I speak about with different wine professionals about wines of Mexico, a lot of people kind of stay a little bit intrigued about like wines in Mexico. I didn't know that Mexico produced wines. So for people that have been here living in Mexico, you might find them a lot and you might be a little bit more related. So the subject is going to be very broad and also very narrow for all of the interests of people that are joining us today. So I guess and I hope that this gives you a glimpse also of how to explore better this part of our culture that for a lot of people seems that it's new, but it's actually pretty old, and it's part it's like knitted in all the tissue of what is Mexican culture. So so I'm listening here, yes, now. So before you were listening me, or you were just not seeing me? I hope that you were listening. So I'm going to start with our presentation. I have a lot of different pictures that I collected from different books. I have like a huge collection of different books from Mexico, and I really like this one, and we will join it later on when we're exploring a little bit more about Mexican history and Mexican wine history. Okay, so to kind of see the map and start understanding where are located the regions. So for me, whenever I explore a wine region, doesn't matter which one and in which part of the world it is, it's always very interesting actually not to just see the map in the political aspect of the division of the state. It's actually much more interesting to be more sensible and more like to be more intrigued to looking at the mountain systems that are around, and for example, if the regions can be closer to the oceans, or what are the influences that create the microclimate and the climates for each region. So when we see Mexico, one of the easiest things to see and to understand why in our idea, Mexico, it's like a big desert, no? For a lot of people, whenever you think about Mexico, you are thinking about cactus or nopales. So obviously, and for those that have been here, you know that that's not whole Mexico, that we have like so many different ecosystems. We have jungle, we have forest, we have plenty of different ecosystems. So what we are going to try to figure out and to describe is like in which ecosystems of Mexico the grapes are growing and why we can produce wines in Mexico. So here are the mountain systems, and then we're going to go further in the presentation to look at them again. So if we're seeing the map, and we're seeing here the map of, like, in general, world production, some people might be familiar with this, we call them franjas del vino, like with these lines where the grape grows, and those are in accordance to the position with the equator. So for example, it's easy here to see why whole Europe, like it's a big producer for grapes, for wine, and you can understand better where the world is located. All the green areas are the green areas where wine is produced. Here is the origin of grapes. We're going to see it a little bit more in the historical part. So if you see here, for example, this part of Mexico, Baja California, Ensenada, enters in the parallels where wine can be grown, and in general, like it has the amount of sun that will be great for the grapes. Some people, that is one of the reasons of why they ask why we can grow wines in Mexico. Like when you see other regions, like for example, Center Mexico, for example, San Miguel de Allende, Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, Aguascalientes, Zacatecas, for a lot of people, you might think that these areas are a little bit too low, so that they get a lot of sun and that they don't have the correct climate for growing, for viticulture, and for having great wines. So one of the questions that I hope I can answer along the presentation is exactly why those regions are able to grow grapes and why we can expect quality in these regions, and what are we doing in the vineyards and a lot of producers to have a good viticulture practice and also how to produce wines here. So for me, when I decided to do this presentation, I like to share with you like the macro and the micro of Mexico and of wines of Mexico, because I think that with a lot of different facts that we're going to be introduced this session and next session, you can understand better where is Mexico also in comparison to the world. So for me, this is something that's very interesting. So here you have like the whole amount of hectares of vineyards that the world have. So you have 7.5 million hectares. You have here the amount of hectares that, for example, Spain, China, a lot of people don't know that China already have taken second place in grape production. So now it's in second position, like they produce more than France. So you have here Italy, Turkey, USA. So if I place the amount of hectares of vineyards that Mexico has, so we have right now 34,000 hectares of vineyards. The numbers that you are seeing are, as you see here in this part of the presentation, are the amount of vineyards for producing grapes, raisins, and wine in the whole world. So that is also why Turkey has such an important position. But if we actually see the numbers of how much we have of hectares for wine production, you have here the number, so that you can also see more or less the amount of hectares that Mexico has and also like how big we are. So I like sometimes to use statistics because that allows us to think like when we are saying something is small or something is big, it helps us a lot to dimension it. So that represents like 0.08% of what the world has. So that is part of why a lot of people are saying like, wine, Mexico has wines. Well, yeah, because we're, in a way, we are very small. Our industry, it's very small. That doesn't mean that our history is small. And that doesn't mean that when you are here and when you are visiting and understanding that world, that we are small in that in the offer and in diversity of the wines that we can have and share and that we are producing. So this is one of the things related to the numbers. Sherry, I don't know exactly how much hectares Argentina and Chile have. I do have the whole document. So if you're interested in that number, I can have it maybe for the next session and I can share it also. Yes, Turkey produce wine. They are very, very old in their production of wine. If we see here the map, we can see that here it's Turkey. Here you have Turkey, and then you have where the mark is like where the wine history began in Mesopotamia. So Turkey is very important wine producer, but they are also very like huge producers of raisins and also of grapes. But also like especially raisins, they are like one of the, I think like one of the top two. So this gives us like kind of an idea about some numbers, and I really like this map when I found it a long time ago, because this is an old map that shows how vine, for those that doesn't know the name of the plant, so how vine was distributed in their history. So we're seeing here the Caspian Sea, we're seeing here the Black Sea. So it started all here in the mountains of the Caucasus. And from there, it was spread as the arrows are showing us. And as we're going to see here in our line time. So from Mesopotamia, if I'm mentioning quickly, just as a small brief, like the history, so that we can tie it together with the Mexican history of how vines arrived here. We're seeing here these like main points. So from Mesopotamia, like we skip like a lot of years, and we arrived to the Greeks, and then we arrived to Roman, to the Ottoman. Then we have like whole Christianity, like the medieval period. And then we have the conquest. And that period is exactly where Mexico received the grapes. So we're in this part, after the conquest, we know that everything, like what happened here in the 1900, it's like the revolutions, independence. For those that know a little bit about wine history or that are wine professionals, I think that there are some here, like phylloxera, that was super important. And then we have like in whole 1900, we have wars and migrations all around the world. And that is part of what we're going to see the influence in the Mexican history. So if we kind of make a zoom to understand this part of the Mexican history. So the Spanish conquest finished like in 1521 here in Mexico. And with the Spanish traveling and arriving here to America, they brought grapes and they brought the vine into America. So in America, we used to have vines, but it wasn't Vitis vinifera, that you can see here in the screen, the name of the plant where we get wine from. So Vitis vinifera is the one that it's Cabernet, Pinot Noir, Gamay, Grenache, but there are plenty of different Vitis. So here in America, we used to have a lot of different Vitis. We just didn't have Vitis vinifera. So those Vitis, Vitis from America, were like giving very small grapes, and you still can see them. For those that are here in San Miguel, You can visit, for example, our winery, and you can see some of the Vitis Americana and see how they grow, like the small fruits, and like they're acid. That's why it wasn't never in the interest of the ancient cultures in Mexico and in whole America to ferment from those grapes that had very low amount of sugar and that were like acid, while they have so many other different fruits to ferment, richer in sugar, and they have like their whole culture in fermentations based on better and more suitable drinks made out of agave or made out of different fruits or made also out of fermented corn, for example. So fermentation, as in like everywhere in the world, it has been like something very important. So each country or each culture, more than saying a country, each culture has been very attached to what it's available in the resources, and that's what they were fermenting. So when Spanish arrived here to Mexico, they arrived with this Vitis vinifera, that was the one that they were using in Europe for producing wine, while there was like a whole culture related to fermentation from grapes. So I know a lot of people don't know, for example, that Mexico was the first place in America where the grapes arrived. And this is the order of how the distribution of grapes happened in America. So it was first in Mexico. From there, it spread to the north, to California, what it is now California, but it used to be part of the territory of Nueva España, of Mexico. Then to the south, it spread first to Peru, and from there to Chile, and Argentina, and Brazil. And for example, South Africa, I like to have context in general. I think that context helps a lot to understand better the other countries. So for example, you have here when the vines arrived to South Africa, when vines arrived to Australia, when vines arrived to New Zealand. So it is very interesting to see that from very early years of this whole period of the conquest, Mexico was like one of these first parts where grapes enter. So we're going to continue with history, but I like to break it a little bit to continue with only this part for you to understand also how much wine we drink and how big is the culture of wine also inside of Mexico and how we live it. So, for example, I guess that everybody knows that here in Mexico, we do drink wine. If you go to a restaurant, there is plenty of different wines. So we drink wine, but it's not like the most drink beverage. So for example, if we compare the amount of liters that different countries drink of wine per year per capita, this is the amount that you have. For example, one that is very known in general is like France with 42.5 liters per capita, for example. So if we see the numbers in Mexico, those numbers seem small. And they are small in comparison to other cultures, obviously. Also, if we remember how big is Mexico in its population, and we divide it also in the amount of people that are able to buy wine, then the amount of liters per capita get much more higher. So, for example, here you have, speaking about this wine production, you have here like the amount of liters that are produced in the world. So this gives you not only the numbers of the hectares that we were speaking, like this gives you the amount of liters. So we're seeing actually wine production in the world. And this is what Mexico has. So we pay attention here, because you have here hectoliters, and here I'm presenting the numbers in liters. So we have 19.3 million liters. It's what Mexico is producing, and which is very small, obviously, in comparison to huge countries that have like plenty of production and plenty of years. So we're going to understand also why in this history that I started mentioning of the conquest and how the vines arrive, how Mexico get to be in this position where we are, and why. If you have comments further into that subject, it will be very interesting for me also to see your own points of view. So right now, from all the wine that we consume here in Mexico, we consume 29.3%, it's Mexican wine. And basically, all of the wine that it's produced here in Mexico, the number that you are seeing here of 19.3 million of liters, basically are getting consumed here. 5 years ago, when I was working in the wine industry as well, like the amount of wine that was consumed, Mexican wine, it was 8%. So this category has grown, and the reason of why it has grown so much is also because the demand of Mexican wine inside of the country is higher, and because this is the amount of how much is the increment of wineries and of new wine appearing in Mexico. So it's getting quite fast, the development of the industry here, and we're going to continue speaking about it. So to understand about the regions where they are producing, so I already presented you this map, and we're going to see it now with the regions that are producing. So I guess that a lot of people knew that Baja California was one of the main regions for production, and it is the biggest region for wine production. More or less from those numbers that I present you, 50%, 53, I have the numbers in another slide, but it's about that, are produced here in Baja California. And then we have in yellow other regions that are important, that are ancient, that are old, that I will be mentioning to continue with our chapter of history, but I wanted you to actually see the map first so that we can be more accurate when we are speaking and you have a little bit of context with that. So we have here Chihuahua, Coahuila, Zacatecas, San Luis Potosí, Guanajuato, that is where we are. So San Miguel de Allende, it's kind of here. Then we have Querétaro, we have Puebla, and we have Jalisco. Puebla and Jalisco are very small in their production, very, very small. So let's say that Baja California is the biggest, and then we have all these other states that are like the most important right now after Baja California. And after those states, there are some small plantations starting in Puebla and some plantations starting in Jalisco. So if we see the map of the mountain system on top of the different states, we can start understanding a little bit about the climate and a little bit about the profile of the wines that you can expect from different regions. So as we can never say like wines from USA and expect that the wines from Napa and the wines from Oregon or the wines from Texas will taste similar just because they are made in one same country. Like it happens here in Mexico. But something that happens in a lot of countries that are a little bit more closer together, and for those that, for example, are familiar with the culture of wines of France or wines of Argentina or the wines of Spain, when I speak about, I give classes, for example, about France And there is a pattern when you're speaking about French wine, because there is an identity, a very ancient identity of the whole country related to what the French culture thinks and perceives as what it is to produce wine, and how they approach to the cultivar, how they approach to the land, how they approach to the climate, to traditions, to their own history. All the regions share a common factor of history. So the closer are those factors in any country, also you will have a pattern that is not only climate and that it's not only soil, that is part of what we call terroir, that is part of the identity, and that characterize and mark in a very direct way a little bit that word that we use that we call know-how. Because the know-how is something that is shared in between a culture, especially if the culture is, as I mentioned, kind of similar in between the regions. So for any country that you are trying to understand about wine, it's very important to understand how similar are in between how similar are in between the regions and how different are in between the regions, because that will express in the wines, because that will express in the hands and in the people and in the winemakers that are producing the wines. So, so seeing and going a little bit more into this map, and just speaking about geography, you can see, for example, that Guanajuato will be a region that it's in between different mountain systems. So it's not very close to the mountain system. It has some kilometers of distance in between, for example, here and this part and this part. But when you have like a huge mountain system here and a huge mountain system here and a huge mountain system, then what it creates is as if you will have walls. So those mountains don't allow that you get the whole influence of the Golfo, for example, here. So you don't get the whole influence from the sea. You don't get the influence from this part of the sea, and you don't have this influence from the sea in the bottom. So for those that we live here, we know that Guanajuato, we call it a semi-desert. And that is the reason of why it is a semi-desert, amongst other things. But that is one of the main reasons, because we are isolated, so it gets dry inside of those walls. For those that we have traveled, for example, in between La Sierra, if you are traveling in La Sierra in this part, then you can get to see sometimes jungle. And that part of the mountain system, as for example, Gilitla, that is more or less here, it's because it's the side of the Sierra, of the mountain system, that is in the position to the sea. So there you get the whole humidity and it stays there. So that is why there it creates an ecosystem that it's kind of a jungle, and it's different. So you can have in the difference of maybe 30 kilometers, a jungle and a huge desert, very close from each other. So mountains, always, whenever we're speaking about regions and wine regions and agriculture and how they are going to express into the grapes, so how they are going to express it into the wine, so they are important. So that was just to make kind of a reference, no? For example, here in Guanajuato, if we understand that aspect and we go, for example, to see Chihuahua, Chihuahua is bigger, and you can see like this part, it's a bigger desert, and it's a little bit also more continental because it's more far from the ocean. So, So for example, here in Guanajuato, we're closer to the ocean and closer to the ocean. And if you're here in Chihuahua, you are far from the ocean, and very far from the ocean on top. So Chihuahua will have a very different climate because of that. So, for example, Chihuahua, you can have much more. If here it's hot, there it's much more hot. If here it's cold, there it's much more cold. So, and for example, if we see here Ensenada, then just by looking at the map, we can understand that Ensenada might have and has a very different climate from the rest of Mexico that it's inside of the continent, because they are in this peninsula. So if we see here, for example, now the name of the regions that I was presenting in the map, these are the regions that we will be speaking during this session. So this session, I'm making like a kind of brief, an introduction about generals of wines of Mexico. I hope I have some time to get to Baja California, and if not, we enter into that in the next chapter. So all of these are the regions that I show you. So here are mark the regions that we're going to be speaking in this webinar. Okay, so these are the regions that we're speaking in this webinar. Because of the time and because I wanted to present the most representative thing, I choose from some of the regions that I think that it's very interesting to share. But that doesn't mean that Aguascalientes, San Luis Potosí, Puebla, and Jalisco don't have something to explore if you decide to understand more about the subject. But we're going to be speaking only about these regions that you can see here and that are marked here. So as I mentioned, Baja California represents 57% of the production. Coahuila represents 8.5% of the production. Querétaro 5% of the production, and Guanajuato 4.5% of the production. I hope that for the next session I have the numbers for Chihuahua and Zacatecas. I was calling the associations to get the numbers, but I didn't have them for today, so I hope that I can be sharing them for you and we can see the graph together for the next week. So continuing with this chapter of history and to arrive to the present side of what it's Mexico producing right now. So understanding Mexico and our history, it's very easy to do it in 6 periods. So I'm going to go very briefly into them because obviously it will take a lot of time to go very into each of the chapters of the history. So we start with the conquest, and we saw it a little bit there. This is what I was speaking about at the beginning of the presentation. So 6 periods and a little bit of before. So these are the name of the grapes from America, for example, that exist. There are also some studies to understand more about this subject and to understand which other Mexican varietals. These ones are one of the, in general, from America, but specifically from this part of North America. Before the Spanish arrived, obviously because these plants existed, a lot of our ancient cultures have names for them. So for example, the Tarahumara culture used to call this plant Uri. Los Otomís used to call it Oxi. Los Purépechas Sarurani. Los Aztecas Acachoyi. We used to have a god and a goddess. It wasn't for wine made out of grapes, but it was for ferments, for alcoholic fermentation drinks. So we know for different studies that it has been made, and it's very well known, that some of these cultures used to take the grapes mixed with honey and also mixed with different beverage, for example. just to make them less sour and like that. And that's how they were drinking, but they were not fermenting from these grapes. The name of the god of medicine and wine, he used to be called Petecatl, and Mayahuel, that is the goddess of drunkenness. And it's very well known, and it's in the mezcal culture. If you will be taking a seminar of mezcal, like Mayahuel, it's very alive in the culture of pulque, mezcal, and into that. I like this thing to share because a lot of people think that distillation is something that we didn't have in America, that for a lot of time that's how history was taught and what we knew, and it was that distillation came with the Spanish when they arrived because of the Arab culture that was like the one who propagated this. But there are studies that confirm, you can read it, it's very easy to find it. It's published by UNAM, by the public university, that in this region, in Tlaxcala, they found what it is called an ancient alambique for distillation. And since 600 to 400 before Christ, in different cultures, they were ancient pre-Hispanic cultures, they were making alcoholic distillation. They didn't know if they were cooking something else, but by how they did the chemical analysis and how they traced the thing, they realized that they were cooking agave, so that they were making distillation. Well, they were cooking agave fermented. So, but let's get into wine. So Spanish arrived, and for example, there used to be a law that for each 100 indigenous people working for any of the Spanish people that have like their haciendas, they must plant 1,000 vines. So it was a law, and it was established. Some grafting was made with these ancient American varietals that I was mentioning, like the Vitis americana. So some grafting was made. And these are like kind of the sequence that the distribution took, like Querétaro, Celaya, Puebla, Guanajuato were the main regions where it started, because if we get to see the map that I was showing you, it's here. If we see here, for example, Mexico City, like it's here, all this part doesn't have the climate for growing vines. But we are very close. If we see all these regions that I was mentioning, Guanajuato, Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, Aguascalientes, Zacatecas, were regions that are kind of close to Mexico City and where everything was happening. So very fast, like it propagate in this area in the colony, in the first years of the colony. So after Guanajuato and these first areas, then it came Aguascalientes, Zacatecas, and then more to the north, Fresnillo, Durango, Parral, that it's Coahuila, Delicias, Chihuahua. And then in very few years, just after, like you see here, this is 1524, and in 1595, a new law arrived that was a prohibition for cultivating the vines. And this happened because there was a conflict for the taxes, and because a lot of people, you can imagine, to drink wine that was traveling from Spain to Mexico in a ship, hot, non-preserved, like obviously the wine that was getting exported, it was, I guess, I always try to imagine it, I guess that it was like not fresh, not nice, And here, like, people were drinking fresh wine, and they were like much more happy with the wine that they were drinking here, and they stopped drinking the wine that could be brought from outside. So at that period, obviously, like, the crown was like super into getting in control of the colony, and like they were with a lot of fear of what it was happening. So a lot of people started complaining in Spain, and then a prohibition law started in 1595. So the law was forbidding new vineyards, and the wine stayed only allowed for the church to convert into Christianism the indigenous people in Mexico. So in general, this is like a rupture for the history, but in a way, it's a line and a part of the history that started and in a way never disappeared, and it's linked and it's still together, and it's part of what we're going to see how it developed. So, for example, there were some exceptions of the burgesy. For example, Don Lorenzo Garcia, who was in Chihuahua, in Parras, has an hacienda that was called Hacienda San Lorenzo. So in 18th of August of 1597, he receives the permission to continue producing wine. And for example, this is the winery that I don't know if any of the ones that you are connected here you have heard, but it's very, very, I don't know, big, popular in Mexico, is well known, and it's called Casa Madero. Like, you can find it in a lot of different restaurants, and you can find it like, basically, if you sit in a Mexican restaurant, like anywhere in Mexico, you will find a wine of Casa Madero. So and one of the reasons of why a lot of people from the industry, we know very well like the stories, because like this is like the most ancient winery from Mexico that is still operating. So then obviously I'm going to jump a lot of different bunch of years because nothing was really actually happening. But in those periods, what was just happening, it was that the missions, I don't know if you're familiar with that term, that is called misiones, that it was like the church was moving around, and then they were creating different missions from Jesuitas, from different orders of Catholicism. And there was like plenty of different missions around Mexico. And also they arrived, some of them, to California, and that is how the history of Californian wine started as well. So basically that's what happened in the whole period of the colonization, you know? Like missions, the wine was for the church, the wine that people used to drink here, the people that have access to it was like the burgesy, and they were drinking Spanish wine that was imported. In some cases, if they were close to the church, they were getting some of their closest missions. And then, for example, the independence happened here in Guanajuato, in Dolores Hidalgo, that it's a small town close from San Miguel de Allende, where we are now. And one of if you go to Dolores Hidalgo, we have a museum of wine there. The association of producers that we live here, and like it's like we started that museum to communicate and to share a little bit about the culture for the people that are living here. And you can see some very old vines as well in these areas that, like, not too much, but some of them have like 100 years. And like one of the things that it said, and it's obviously very arguable, a very like something that a lot of people can argue. But one of the things that it said in plenty of books is that somebody burned obviously the independence was about to start. Everything was very hot at that point, and it was decided that the movement was going to happen. But one of the things that triggered the independence was that those days they burned the vineyard of Cura Hidalgo. That was one of the things that accelerated things to start the independence. So it's written, it's not me saying it, but it's interesting to see it also and to have that number. So the independence happened, and obviously, like the country was like have other priorities. So like the whole country was like establishing, and there were plenty of different interests. So wine was not like the main interest at that point. Some of the missions were abandoned at that time. So it was like a very tricky time, like that whole 1800 period. And then you have here, for example, in 1893, the Familia Madero of Casa Madero buy Hacienda San Lorenzo in Parras. So that is where the winery start being part of the family, and is that family that continue the production of wine. Or so it's like a lot of people were like between buying different haciendas. I didn't place them all here because obviously it would be a little bit tedious to speak about how that part happened. But so if we remember about the Mexican history, in 1910, we have the Mexican Revolution. And the revolution was part of the history where Porfirio Diaz was in power, and Porfirio Diaz's father-in-law used to have, yesterday I was reading about that, he used to have like 10,000 hectares at that period here in Guanajuato. Like Porfirio Diaz, as everybody kind of knows, he was like very into French lifestyle. So he liked wine and he liked all those kind of things in culture. But like very quickly, like in 1910, like the revolution starts. And in that period, if you connect it with all the history that you know in the world, it's also where a lot of migrations start. So the migrations of Russians and of Italians arrived to Valle de Guadalupe. So migrations have always been a very interesting subject in any country for the influences that they brought about their cultures. So L.A. Cheto, Don Angelo Cheto, established in 1928 the winery called L.A. Cheto. Some of you might know it, in Ensenada as well. So we're speaking about Baja California. Then, for example, Santo Tomás in Ensenada, then La Redonda. You see that we're moving kind of fast in the line time, but some of the wineries that were established there. So, so one of the things that happened at this part of the history is that 1970 you have here a wine that was made for an actress that is a very famous actress from Mexico, Maria Felix, from 1955. So this part of the 1970 to the 1990, what happened is that these wineries that were slowly establishing, some of the wineries that were here in Querétaro, some of them were in Aguascalientes, some of them were in Ensenada. We're speaking a very small industry. They were producing a lot of brandy, and they were producing some wine, because for the people that were here in Mexico living, like Mexicans and also foreigners that wanted to drink wine, and importation wasn't that easy at that time. So the 1970s to the 1980, it was like a boom of that industry. We reached the number, if you remember from the first slide that I was sharing, we are right now like about 34,000 hectares of grapes planted, not of grapes for wine. At that point of history in the 80s, we used to have 80,000 hectares. So we have a huge decrement in the wine production in this last, from middle of the 80s to the 90s, it was like a huge decline that happened. And what things happened? Well, like the devaluation, like Mexico, one of the biggest crises of Mexico, for example, in the 1994, but there was another one in the 80s. Then a lot of the different trades, I don't know how to say it, but like the trades to import and to, that happened. So people, the Mexican wine industry couldn't be competitive with the wines that were importing. And so people start preferring to drink foreign wine, French wine, Spanish wine. So a lot of those things created this thing where it collapses again. And then in this period, that is basically what it creates where we are right now, and is the most important one, is like another boom happened. And that is what the wines that we're drinking. And this happened with the work and with the inspiration of different people that some of them arrived because they were migrating and they have a know-how that they brought to Mexican areas, especially to Ensenada. And also some winemakers, well, winemakers that are right now, they start traveling and then they came back with knowledge to produce wine. And they basically, if we are speaking about how old is Mexican wine history, I actually don't know very well how to answer that, because a lot of people think like Mexican wine started in the last 30 years. A lot of people will answer you, it started in the last 15 years. A lot of people see it as if it will be new and it will be happening in the last 5 years. But basically, like, the story is very ancient. And I do think that all of it is tied together and that we have still a lot of the influence of all these parts of the history. So I'm going to move further with the presentation and with other subjects. But if later you wanna go back and speak a little bit about this part or some idea get together, it will be fun to discuss. So speaking about let's see about some of the main regions. So I wanted to share a very practical thing to understand the profile of wines of any region. So sunshine is something that matters a lot. The more sun you have for any fruit during the ripening season, the amount of sugar will increase. So if you have a tree that have some whatever fruit and it's in the shadow, you know that it's not going to ripen very well. So sunshine, it's super important for the amount of sugar. So the amount of sugar will be always directly proportionated to how much alcohol we get into the wine. Because if I have a lot of sugar and the yeast eats a lot of that sugar, then I will have that in alcohol. So for the most, like, the more sunshine a region has, more alcoholic wines I will have, lower acidity, burnt colors, caramelized fruits will be more like that. So if I have more cool climate regions, that means more cloudy regions and regions that doesn't have that much sun hours during the growing season, you will have the other style of wines that are the two spectrums. So you have wines that are a little bit more acid, that have low alcohol content. By low alcohol content, I'm not saying 10 alcohol, but I mean 12.5 instead of 14 degrees of alcohol. You will have red wines that will have like more sharp colors, that are more like a magenta, more purple, more ruby colors, instead of a little bit more reds that are a little bit more burnt. I'm speaking to the contrary, no? So with lower sunshine, also you will have the smell of the fruit. Let's say if a wine smells to raspberry, or it smells to strawberry. So in a cool climate region, we will have it as if it will be just cut it, and just like you will cut off strawberry and you just smell it. And in a hot climate region, it will smell as a strawberry jam. So I guess that this is something that you all have perceived when you are drinking wine. You are tasting wine and you have like these differences. Or if there is any wine professional here, obviously you know that. So I'm going to explain this in relation to the Mexican regions, because I think that that is also a very easy trick to understand in accordance to the style of wines that you like, in which region you can find similar styles of the profile that you are used to drink. So I will ask to any of you to, or more to all of you, to think a little bit about like, how do I like my red wines? Like full body or medium body? Medium acidity or high acidity, or I like wines that are not acid? How much astringency I like in the wine, like the tannin. I like that there are very tannin wines, or that there are lower tannin wines. So try to think, and also think about your whites, how you like them. You like them sharp, you like them crispy, you like them more like very floral. Take some notes and understand through your senses, like how are those wines? Because sometimes we order wines, and that it happens to me a lot, that people says to me, I love Pinot Noir. But Pinot Noir can be very different from Napa than from France. So the second question that I always make when somebody is asking me, like, I like Pinot Noir, I ask, from where? Because that allows me to read how is the climate in that region, and then which style is that person liking. So if we see this, for example, in an example here with some regions that you might know, and we see, for example, Pinot Noir from Sonoma, California, versus a Pinot Noir from Bourgogne in France. So you will have here, for example, more body in the one from Sonoma, and you will have like this amount of intensity of flavor. And in the Pinot Noir, you will have lighter body. Huh? In Syrah, for example, from Australia versus Gros Hermitage, that it's in Valle de Ródano, you will have a different expression of Syrah. So you will have a more full body wine in Australia, and you will have medium body in Syrah. From which one you will expect more alcohol? From Australia. Because and which one you will expect more jammy fruit? Like here in Australia. Lower acidity, Australia. More acidity, more freshness, Côte d'Or, Gros Hermitage in France. More fruit, like fresh fruit, it will express like that. So I give this example in order that we can see how Mexico behaves. So here are like for you to have some track maybe of the regions that you know and that you are very used to drink. So this is what we are calling, sorry, I left this in Spanish, zonas frías and zonas calientes. So this will be like cool climate regions, hot climate regions. So you can relate to the styles. And if you see, there is a pattern about how the reds are from these regions and how the reds are from these regions. Obviously, always with its differences of the matrix, no? Like the matrix is very complex. So we're speaking here only about what climate creates in wine in the characteristics. Okay, so if we see here, in order the regions that we are going to be speaking about, here you have a brief introduction about what you can expect from Mexican wine profiles. So Ensenada, because it's climate, so in the next session we're going to go in the micro of each one of these regions to understand a little bit about those factors, to see some pictures, to speak about their identity and about the people that are producing them, etc. But here, just to close this session, you can see and you can understand that Ensenada is the region that gets more sun hours. Then Chihuahua and Coahuila, then Zacatecas, then Guanajuato, and Querétaro. So with these examples that I mentioned, I hope and I guess that you might be already playing in your minds of like, so I would like to try wines from this region and to explore it and to try it here. Or if you are a natural explorer and you like to try all of them, then you might also have an order of what you can be expecting in each one. Okay, so we have like 20 minutes for some questions. I would like to know if somebody have some questions of what we were seeing today. If there's no, we can continue with Baja California, but if somebody have some comments, questions, you can write in the chat or you can raise your hand also, and then Rebecca and Ginger will give you the mic if it's a long question to answer, to write down in the webinar, in the chat.
Natalia,
Yeah.
This is Ginger.
Yeah.
A few questions that came up was, does Turkey produce wines or just grapes?
I answered already that one. Like
Okay.
I think I answered two of those that were there.
Okay.
But let me see if there was.
But there was a question that we have a lot of hectares of grapes, but less wine production and consumption. Was that addressed? Turkey.
About Turkey?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. There's a question, where did you say the Museum of Wine can be found?
Okay. You can find the wine museum that is here in Guanajuato. It's in Dolores Hidalgo. Dolores Hidalgo. You can find it in Instagram as well. They have their own Instagram and they post different things. The idea is also to have some courses there and to have some wine tastings there with the different producers of the region. And for those that would like to travel once to Ensenada or like that, Ensenada also have their own museum. Which non-native grapes translate best in Mexico? So if I understand, Brian, the question is like about the grape varietals, like which are the most adapted here from vitis vinifera, I guess, like from wine production. Just if you write to me if I get the question right, so that I answer that. Did Hidalgo produce wine, or why was his vineyard burned? Did it belong to the church? They produce wine for the church, for the Eucharistia, for the church religion, but they were like there was a very strict laws, because like they couldn't produce for their consumption. They needed to produce it only for the church services, and they wanted wine in general, like for them. And why they were burned? Well, he was like one of the leaders of the independence, so I guess that there was some conflict of interest over there, because he was not a supporter of the Spanish crown. Is it possible to visit Casa Madero? Yes, it is open, and they have plenty of different visits. Very interesting winery. So Brian, yeah, I got then your question. So you can imagine that for each climate, we will have different varietals that are working better. For example, Ensenada, because it is like the one that received more sun hours, it's for example more for hot climate varietals. So for example, they work very well with Carignan, Grenache, Cabernet Sauvignon. They work very nice with Syrah. The next part, in each region that we will be seeing, I will present you the favorites that people are working with. But to use our time also in this kind of discussion, it's very interesting actually to mention that we are in a very early stage in different regions to understand what works the best. Because to understand which varietals are the best for each region, honestly, it's something that takes sometimes like a whole generation, so that the second one can actually understand. Because you plant a vineyard and then you start producing wine from that vineyard like in 5 years. And then you are actually just understanding how are those grapes for that vineyard. So that is why a lot of the oldest and most ancient wine regions are great for also what they produce. Like they have a really know-how about not only how to grow those grapes, not only about the subtle know-how in the vineyard and the traditions that are creating along all that time. It also requires that once that you have those grapes, the winemaker obviously has to be trained. So for a new industry, sometimes we're speaking about wineries that are starting to learn not only how grapes behave, also how to produce wine. So that also takes a couple of years in some wineries to understand which style of wines and which is the voice of the winery and the profile that they are searching. And then it also requires some years to actually start working the subtleties of the grape varietal in the wine cellar. So we have some idea, that's what I will present, which varietals are working the best. As consultant and working in this industry, I've seen a lot. I like a lot of different things, but if you speak with different producers in different areas, sometimes we are saying different things. We're not in a stage of maturity of the industry to have a common point of view of what it works, and there's so much to experiment of grape varietals. Okay, so I will take some of the other questions. Or I don't know if Ginger, you know which question should go.
There were some questions about your winery, about visiting your winery, Cava Garambullo, and the details about that.
Yes, so we are open in San Miguel de Allende. Well, right now, because of the contingency, we needed to close, but we are starting to reopen for visits. And basically, in general, yes, everything for us, it's a very small winery, so we work only on the reservation. So if you follow us in our Instagram, that is @cava-garambullo, @cava-garambullo, I will write it down here. It's a great way to stay connected, and you can ask for the visits, and we make visits for 2 persons or for a small group. The biggest group that we take is 10 persons, so we like only small groups.
So, thank you, Natalia. There's also a question from Benjamin Becker. Would you kindly talk about the types of wines at Viñedos SMA, Santísima Trinidad, San Lucas de Encuña de Tierra, and how do they compare to each other and to those in Ensenada or Casa Madero?
Sure. And I think also this one of the international competition. Okay, so we are going to go very deep into that part when we arrive to Guanajuato, Benjamin, but I can give you a teaser. So each winery has a different concept and a different line of experimentation. So, for example, to give you something concrete about it, it's something that's very interesting is, for example, Cuna de Tierra has a lot of Spanish influence because from where the winemaker studied, and because his father used to be like from Spain. So he has a lot of that idea, and he's working obviously with what the region can have, but like his style goes a little bit towards there. For example, Santísima Trinidad, in my opinion, and they say it very openly, they are working a lot with the influence from Argentina. So they inspire a lot their work in the enological side from it. And I think that it's accurate in a way. For example, some of the main varietals that are growing here in the region are Malbec. It's growing well. So they love to work with that varietal, and they give a lot of importance. And for example, Cuna de Tierra doesn't have that much importance for Malbec right now. They are working more towards other varietals because that has always been like their passion and their interest. So you will see that expression in the history of each winery in Mexico in general. Oh, sorry, my dog, I'm sorry, but I will mute myself. Fuera. I'm very sorry. So what else? I don't know.
So Natalia, there's a couple questions in the Q&A. They seem slightly related. One both from Guillermo Garcia. He says, in the early 80s, wines from Baja California were not as good as they are now. It seems the winemakers have improved their craft. And he says, I live in San Dimas, California. I like California wines. The best wine from Mexico I've tasted is from Baja California. I tasted wine from near San Miguel, but it was not very good. Besides the weather, what other factors come into play?
Yeah, like for example, I will say that a huge factor for Mexican wines is the maturity of the project. Like how old the wineries are in what they are doing. Obviously, you will expect that with the time, a lot of the different wineries will get better. And also, for example, I share that opinion about Ensenada. When I came after studying in France, I didn't know too much about Mexican wine. So I went to a wine fair and I was tasting different wines, and I was amazed by sometimes like it was like a big sample. So I was like shockingly surprised about some good stuff, really good things, and sometimes honestly like wines that I didn't like, and wines that in my opinion will have technical defects. And very quickly that changed for some of those wineries that I tried, maybe with 4 years after, like they drastically improve a lot with what they were doing. And that happens because when we're speaking about a wine industry that is young, Ensenada is the oldest in general and the most mature region. It takes generations, but it also takes a lot of different winemakers to arrive, because the experimental side, it's sometimes fun, but it's not always extremely good. So what happened in Ensenada is that a lot of people took very seriously their job and their industry, and they started hiring professionals, and also they were more ready to understand better what it takes to produce wine. I always said, like, to produce wine, it's easy, but to produce good wine, it's very hard. Just to ferment sugar into alcohol, something that it's pretty easy. If somebody here have made it, you will, like, a lot of people make their own brews, but like it's not that hard to have a fermentation. But to have the finesse and to have a nice wine and that it's balanced, it takes a lot. That's why, like as when it takes to how it is to produce bread, we consider it an art, and we consider that there's people that are like mentors for you to, or also in gastronomy, and it's exactly the same in the wine industry. Like it takes a lot of years for that.
Natalia, did you address the questions about the international competitions with Mexican wines?
I think no, I didn't. And there is plenty of wines going on right now in international competitions. Right now, we got news this week, for example, of a wine from Coahuila that's called Viñedos Don Leo, that they sent a wine from Cabernet Sauvignon into an international contest of Cabernet Sauvignon, and it won the best Cabernet Sauvignon of the world. So everybody is very shocked right now. Like everybody is celebrating, like in the chats, everybody is like congratulating each other, because even though nobody, like only we're celebrating for that winery, Don Leo, it's like a huge, I don't know, everybody gets happy because it means that the efforts that the industry is making, or the individual efforts, even that some of them are collective, some of them are individual. Like it's nice to have always those news. But for example, if you enter to Decanter, or if you enter to Wine Enthusiast, that is two magazines that are like very common for news related to wine. If you type their Mexican wine, you will get like a whole list of the different medals that the wines are receiving. Like for example, Cuna de Tierra have received different medals. Viñedo San Miguel, I think that somebody called it BSM, Viñedo San Miguel, also Tres Raíces. And there's also plenty of different wineries that are not that much into contests and into that scene. So also you will see, you have plenty of great wineries that don't play that game or that trend of the medals. You share the link of the best Cabernet Sauvignon ginger.
Yes, I did. Did you address the question about the different local wineries in San Miguel?
Yes, sorry, can you repeat me again, Ginger?
It was talking about the types of wines around San Miguel, Santísima Trinidad, San Lucas, Cunha de Tierra. How do they compare to each other and to those in Ensenada or Casa Madero?
Yes, so I guess that it's going to be more clear when we explain both of those regions. So for example, Casa Madero, if you're seeing here the map, is in this part where it's Coahuila. So if you see here Guanajuato, so Coahuila, in comparison to Guanajuato, has more sun hours than Guanajuato. For those that that live here, we know that right now that the rainy season just started, so it will last a lot. Like the hot days are over. So the most hot days and the most sunny days are in the spring, but right now we start having a lot of cloudy days. So if I say it briefly, what you will expect from differences in between Guanajuato and Coahuila or Casa Madero is that here the wine will be a little bit more light, will be more medium body, and Coahuila will have like more full body style of wine. That is one of the differences. And here you will find more like the freshness of the fruit, and in general in Coahuila you will be more into the jams a little bit, less than Ensenada. It's
Natalia, a question from Krista Spinelli. Are the owners of the wineries primarily Mexican, or are a lot of the winery owners in Mexico foreign?
Most of them are Mexicans, but let's say if I just give like a brief percentage, let's say that about 30% it's like foreign owners, like people from other parts of that is not Mexico. But it also, like a lot of wineries started from people that were foreigners. For example, Eleaceto, they were Italian, or Casa Magoni, that it's a very important winery in Ensenada, they were Italian, and now like their family, it's like Mexican, and they like it's all generations. Or for example, yeah, but for example, here in San Miguel de Allende, only Dos Buos, it's half American, half Mexican, no? Like the owners. Or for example, me, I'm from Mexico, and my husband, he's from Bosnia. So we're mixed. So sometimes you have mix of couples, but more or less like 70% of the wineries, yes, they are Mexican.
Okay, Natalia, last question before we wrap up from Linda King. She was asking about, is Mexico's strength in red wine, or are there good white wines as well?
It's an interesting question, Linda. Yes, I will be more precise when I'm sharing with you each region, because each region has like more, like for example, there are some regions that are better for reds. For example, Ensenada is great for reds. Their whites are very good, but in general, because of the climate, the acidity is not great for their whites. And so in general, for me, personally, I love the reds. Chihuahua, I like a lot the reds, and they are working very toward reds. And Coahuila has great reds, great whites. It's like because of the climate they have like very good, they're good in both styles. So for example, if we go to Guanajuato, Guanajuato can be a region that could be great for whites. The thing is that the demand in general, I don't know if you know these numbers, but for example, in general, the consumption of red in Mexico versus white is like 70-30. So people really drink more red than white. So that is why a lot of wineries are not like super happy to say like, I'm going to explore only white. That will be great. And that will be great to have some wineries that are here in Guanajuato because we have the climate for it. And for example, Querétaro is one of the regions that is where is Freixenet, where they produce cava. So they are trying to specialize, and they're specializing also with sparkling wine. So they have nice sparklings. Some people don't like the style of reds from Querétaro. I work there and I've tried great things related to red. So also, yeah, that will be a little bit about it. So basically, if you're searching for white and you like the crispy style of whites and like with nice acidity and the finesse of a white, Parras could be a great place to find something for whites. And also explore Querétaro. I really like what they are doing there. There is a winery that is called Vinaltura, and they're producing very beautiful whites.
Thank you,
So,
Natalia,
Thank you, Natalia. Fascinating.
very much. Yep, learned a lot.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope that it was interesting for everybody. And so stay connected, stay tuned. If you want to read something about it, read about Mexican wine these days, and also we can share more next week. Thank you very much for your attention, for your questions. I'm very happy that you love it, Sherry. Patricia, great to see you here.
Thank you so much, Natalia. So we will see everybody here same time next week on June 18th for part 2 of Natalia's presentation. And we've recorded this presentation, and it will be available on our website tomorrow. You can donate on the website, and you can register for our upcoming webinars on muralism, which will be in July. But join us next week, and we will see you then. Thank you, Natalia.
All right, bye, everybody.